Welcome to the Business Radio Network. Enjoy Small Biz, Big Voices with Stephanie Rising.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Rising, a business coach and author in beautiful Tucson, Arizona. Being a small business owner is rewarding, but can feel lonely. Few people understand what it's like to sweat payroll, market themselves as a brand, or create revenue streams from scratch. For the next hour, join your tribe on Small Biz, Big Voices, the podcast that celebrates the stories and impact of your fellow small business owners. Today, we're going to visit with Alexis Lopez of a Transformative Touch Wellness Center. Our interview will conclude with a Proust lightning round, and our final segment will be Dear Coach, when I'll coach listeners through issues they've emailed in. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Alexis Lopez of a Transformative Touch Wellness Center. Since 2006, Alexis has brought holistic healing to the root causes of emotional, mental, and physical traumas. She is passionate about exploring alternate healing and spiritual traditions and has traveled the world to study with indigenous teachers and healers. These experiences led Alexis to create the powerful and life-changing Reset Therapy model, which stands for Regressive Emotional Shame-Eliminating Trance Therapy. Alexis leads ayahuasca retreats in Rocky Point and is herself a practitioner of visionary plant medicine. Alexis is also the best-selling author of From Anxious to Awesome, available on Amazon. She writes and speaks on the topics of feelings, consciousness, and connection, and she has been published on CNN, Elephant Journal, Huffington Post, and Quartz. She most recently discussed the art of self-centered living in the July edition of Natural Awakenings magazine. Alexis, welcome to the show, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, me too, because one of the reasons I really enjoy doing the podcast is I'm fascinated by what other people do and what they are passionate about. And I've been eager to have you on the show because of all the businesses I know, yours is probably the most unique. What compelled you to study plant medicine like ayahuasca, and did you have any concerns about bringing something some people feel is controversial out of the shadows?
Well, what brought me to plant medicine was that I was studying different types of shamanic techniques. And, shamanism doesn't have to equal plant medicine. That's actually kind of a niche within shamanism. So I was actually doing a intensive up in Sonoma and using drums, rattles, singing, dancing, because it's all about ways in which to go into different trance states and to shift your consciousness, because when we can shift our consciousness, we can get better insights and we have better access to more of who we are and to wisdom that is perhaps beyond the rational mind. So that's what I was doing at the time, and it was through a journey. We call it journeying when you move into these other non-ordinary realities. Mm-hmm. I was journeying, and it was actually in a journey that I was told that I would go down to South America and I would partake in a ceremony down there with this plant called ayahuasca. And at the time, I had never even heard of it. I couldn't even pronounce it correctly. And I wasn't all that gung-ho about it, because once I started asking people about it, and I started to realize what it was a psychedelic therapy. It's a visionary medicine that's been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years in South America, in the jungles, by the indigenous peoples there. And it's something that takes us into non-ordinary reality, but there's a certain amount of control that is lost by the person who's doing it. Mm-hmm. And I am a big control freak when it comes to me. So I was not looking forward to that. But I also knew that in my healing journey at that point, I had come to a place in that journey in which there were things I couldn't get to. And everything that I had tried was not helping me to get there. It's kind of like when something's behind you and every time you move, it's still behind you. And yes. So you're like a dog trying to chase its tail and you can't get to it. So even though I was quite nervous about it, I knew that it was something that I needed to go and do. And so in 2007, I went down into the jungles on my own to a camp down there and partook in this ancient ceremony of ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is actually two different ingredients. It's the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna leaves. And when you put those two together, they create the ayahuasca brew. And you ingest it. And when you ingest it, there are effects that happen. So, there's purgative effects. So that's always fun. But very cleansing on a lot of different levels, because it's not just about physical purging. It's also about energetic, emotional, and spiritual purging. And then there's also sometimes visions, voices, messages, physical healing. So, the amount of experience that happens in this 6-hour period of this ceremony is pretty phenomenal and unlike anything else you will probably ever experience. And I walked out of there changed, very, very changed. And I have to say, since 2007, there isn't much in my life that I can't say hasn't been touched by those experiences, including reset therapy, which is what I do at my wellness center in my private practice. And that came out very directly from my experiences with plant medicine. So, yeah.
So what did it take? You know what going through that process has done for you now, in retrospect, but at the time, what did it take for you to overcome that reluctance and that release of control? This is not a small thing, to journey into the jungles of a foreign country by yourself and partake in this medicine. So what was it? Just sheer curiosity? It was just this compulsion that you couldn't quite account for? It just felt like something you had to do?
Yes. For me, that was more like that. Everyone is called differently, and it's a very unique experience. And there's not just ayahuasca. There's lots of different types of natural plant medicines. You've got psilocybin, peyote, ibogaine, ayahuasca, San Pedro. So those are more of your natural psychedelics. And then, of course, you also have man-made psychedelics like LSD and MDMA, which is also known as ecstasy on the street. So there are these different tools and different teachers, and different people are going to be drawn to the different teachers. And let me just say, and I may say it more than once, it's not for everybody. It really is not for everybody. And I feel like you really should wait to feel that tug. And sometimes the tug is very joyful. People are like, oh, I'm so excited to go and do it. And other people are a little bit more like me, where they were like, oh, I know I have to do this, but I'm scared, or I'm really worried about what I'm going to have to face. And I'll tell you, there's been lots of times in ceremony when I have faced some really hard stuff, and actually sometimes been disappointed in myself, because you like to think that when you are offered the road less traveled, that you will be brave enough to take it. And sometimes you're not. And there's a lesson in that too, that, maybe you need to say no for a while, and you need to kind of struggle with yourself. And so I think sometimes in saying no and having to work through that and my resistance helped me to become a better helper for other people, because I really began to understand how much fear I had in myself, which meant that I could help other people and recognize it in other people, instead of kind of lying to myself and thinking, sure, I don't have any fear, I'm really good, no problem. Which was what I was kind of telling myself. And so I had to really face that I had a lot more anxiety than I was admitting, which allowed me, once you can look at that, the healing can begin. Up until that point, I couldn't heal.
And I imagine this kind of medicine, because it is outside the norm, it's giving you a completely different set of tools to use, to reflect on, to use in your healing process, which is why I think it's kind of curious. I think that a lot of people struggle with the demands of the modern world, the demands of just even their peer group, where, culturally you're just brought up in a very particular construct, and that has a lot of advantages and it has some disadvantages. But I think that all of us have felt a toll at one point or another that kind of takes on us. I also think that a lot of people recognize that being in nature makes us feel better. And there's a ton of evidence to back up the effects of nature on our stress levels, on our ability to heal, on our ability to feel reconnected. And yet, there's a lot of suspicion around plants as medicine. Why did that particular topic become so controversial? I mean, they're just plants.
Yes.
Like, how did plants become scary?
So dangerous.
Yes.
Very dangerous. Yeah. So let's talk about, so we have the natural psychedelics, which again have been used for generations by indigenous peoples. Peyote up here in North America. You have psilocybin in like the Oaxacan area in Mexico.
And remind me, I'm sorry for interrupting, what is psilocybin?
Psilocybin is magic mushrooms.
Okay.
Yeah. So better known as magic mushrooms. And like ayahuasca, and there's lots of other ones that are not as well known down in South America. They live in a jungle, so they've got this wonderful pharmacy at their disposal. And so, but let's talk about for a minute psychedelics in the U.S. and how we got to the point of thinking these things are really dangerous. So originally LSD and MDMA were created for psychiatry. And
interesting. So the origins of ecstasy, which has been demonized.
And that was in the 80s. Yeah.
Okay.
The 70s and 80s was MDMA.
Okay.
And then in the 1930s is when LSD was first started. And actually the CIA was very interested in it. They were finding that it was opening the mind. You know, it was allowing for flexibility of the mind. It was allowing for different perceptions, being able to connect with people. And so this could be very helpful for mental diseases. And that's what they were looking at it for. But what happened was that in 1965, when we're at the height of anti-war feelings, also civil rights, we have a group of people that started to create LSD, make it in their kitchens, and get it out to the public. And what happened was that when people started taking LSD, they started loving each other. They didn't want war anymore. They really wanted to talk about shaking up society and culture as we knew it. They started to question authority. And this caused havoc. And it was a movement that was starting to happen in kind of this countercultural movement with the young people that were taking the LSD. And they obviously had enough power that Nixon, who was president at the time, took notice. And in 1970, he created the Controlled Substance Act and made all of those psychedelics illegal. Now, why would he do that? I mean, why was this something that had to be done? Well, because he wanted to disempower the anti-war and the civil rights movement. And don't take my word for it, actually, John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's domestic policy advisor, stated in an interview with Harper's Magazine, this is in his own words, by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite the confession.
So they made the psychedelic medicines, man-made and the natural ones, that have been used for thousands of years. They made them a Schedule I. That is the most dangerous drug. That means that they have a high potential for abuse and have no currently accepted medical treatments.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I mean, let's look at that. Like, drugs, the biggest things that we're worried about with drugs is whether they're addictive, whether they kill people, and whether they're connected to crime. I mean, that's what we've been told. Wasn't that the whole Reagan thing of just say no to drugs. Drugs make you a bad person, right? Or they kill you. So just looking at that, addiction, the latest global drug survey on psychedelics say that they are they're the safest recreational drugs in the world for just an example, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, was responsible for less than 0.2% of medical treatments worldwide. Worldwide, 0.2. That is nothing.
That's less than Tylenol.
Yeah, and so they aren't scientifically, physically addicting. And the other thing is that on the death side, you can overdose and have very unfortunate kind of physical or mental experiences,
Sure.
But you're not going to kill yourself with psychedelics. Psychedelics, you can't overdose and die, and they don't make you crazy, which is another thing that was going around, that they made you insane. So all of this was misconceptions that were very consciously put out into the public to make people scared of the psychedelics because they were very powerful. Having something that people could take and would open their minds and start to create a movement that brought people away from the culture, which was to follow what the government is telling you, was a very dangerous thing to put in the hands of the public. And they wanted to vilify it. They wanted to take it away. So it's really wonderful and fascinating that we're having this psychedelic renaissance now, because marijuana is still a Schedule I, even though states have made it legal on the federal level, DEA. It is still a Schedule I.
Well, and that was one of the things that I was thinking about, in preparing for our conversation today is, given the trends in states like Colorado and California, as well as numerous studies that are coming out about alternatives to pharmacological medicine, what is the data really bearing out? I mean, I know depending on a person's symptoms, how they're responding to medications is going to differ, but are these plant medicines working as effectively as modern prescription meds?
Yes, we need a lot more research, first of all. And let me back up. So Oakland has just the city of Oakland has decriminalized all natural psychedelics right now, and Denver has decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms in the cities. Berkeley, it's coming up on their docket to vote for it. Oregon is talking about in 2020 a statewide decriminalization of psilocybin. So you can begin to see there really is this wave, this change of thinking. And I certainly think that cannabis had a huge part to play in this. So there has been a 40-year lull of research because it was seen as unethical to work with any of the psychedelics. So it's only been since about 2006 that there have been a lot of small independent studies that have been started. But to just give you an idea here, psychedelics can effectively treat mental health disorders like depression and anxiety and PTSD. That's what they're starting to find in these small independent research. And the early research is indicating that psychedelics can be even more effective than the medicines that are currently prescribed. And some of those reasons are that they can work with treatment-resistant people. They're not addictive. You can't overdose on them. So you can begin to see, because in a lot of these cases, what they're giving people are antidepressants that actually are addictive, or painkillers, which are heavily addictive.
Opioid crisis.
Yeah, and you have horrible death rates when you overdose, whether meaning to or not. So, for example, a study conducted by the Berkeley Foundation, 12 people with treatment-resistant depression were relieved from their symptoms for months after receiving just a single dose of psilocybin. Months.
Wow.
We're not talking about taking a pill every day. They had months of release. These are people treatment resistant. Months of release from depression with one dose. In 2011, Johns Hopkins University discovered that a single dose of psilocybin could make people more open-minded for up to a year. So, seeing some of these things. Now, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. If anyone who's listening is interested in, finding out more about some of the psychedelic studies that are out there, MAPS, M-A-P-S, is a great place to go. 136 patients who all suffered from PTSD for an average of 19 years and were unresponsive to typical treatments found lasting results from just 2 MDMA-assisted therapy sessions. 83% success rate compared to just 10 to 20% for SSRI antidepressants. success rate.
Wow.
I mean, that's amazing. And after 4 years, nearly all of the patients have remained PTSD-free, and those who relapsed were cured after a single additional MDMA-assisted therapy session. So we need a lot more research. Johns Hopkins just opened the first psychedelic research center. That just happened. So hopefully we're going to see a lot more research coming out. The FDA right now, MDMA is among it was really the first Schedule I drug to be tested in a phase 3 trial for use with PTSD. And also psilocybin is now also in trials with the FDA for depression. So we are seeing a change in how things are moving. And of course, anecdotally, we have so many stories of people being helped. I mean, just amazing stories of PTSD, anxiety, depression, people having these experiences that go beyond just dealing with symptoms. I think that's the other thing, is that when you start to deal with psychedelics, you're not just dealing with trying to kind of keep the lid on a symptom,
right,
where you have to take it every day or the symptom comes back, because
right,
that's just a lid. That's nothing. That's a Band-Aid. They're actually going into the deeper causes of why that person feels anxiety, why they're depressed, what the trauma was, and being able to look at it in a different way, being able to have a different perspective of it. These psychedelics allow the mind to communicate to itself in different ways. So parts of the mind that are usually very quiet and unable to communicate with the rest of the brain become opened up, so that there is more activity throughout the entire brain. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing the effects that we're seeing.
So that makes me think of, particularly when you're talking about folks who are treatment resistant, or the depth of their trauma is just to such an extent that garden variety pharmaceuticals are just they're not going to hack it. And I know that one of the groups that you'd like to reach out to and share this information with are veterans. And the VA reports that there were more than 6,000 veteran suicides per year between 2008 and 2016. And they also now believe that up to 30% of Vietnam veterans have experienced PTSD during their lifetime. So I think you were beginning to touch on this. How does plant medicine help to heal trauma in ways where maybe other PTSD treatments have not been successful? Does it have to do with the brain being able to communicate with itself? And it's almost like it helps you to be vulnerable enough to go to those places where you've experienced the trauma, and it's like healing from inside out rather than, like you said, kind of, the dissolvable Band-Aid. Yeah, no, it's definitely healing from the inside out. These are introspective medicines, and they're disruptive as well. So often the reason that we get into a pattern like PTSD is that there is a stuck pattern in which the brain and the neurons and the pathways in the brain, there's a groove, and we're kind of stuck on that groove, where these medicines can go in and disrupt that stuck pattern and give you a new way of looking at something, a new way of processing something. You can't ever, what happened, but how you look at it, how you feel about it, and how you've integrated into your life is what healing looks like. So if you can really begin to understand how a certain situation or experience affected you and how it can be used in your life as you move forward, you're going to be a lot healthier than if you're just stuck in the trauma, the fear, the grief, the anger of whatever that experience was. So, that's one of the things about these medicines is they're mind expanding. They help us to become more flexible, just like that Johns Hopkins University study that said, one dose of psilocybin and people had more flexibility in their mind and their ability to think in different new ways and to think outside their usual box for an entire year. That's one dose of that. So you can see how it could really help people to get out of their rut, to get out of their stuckness. And that's what people say when they are in PTSD or when they're feeling depression or anxiety is, I'm stuck. I can't get out of this. And it's a horrible, awful feeling to be there.
So to kind of go in there and to help them, like you said, to experience that trauma in a new way and to have different perspective, to disrupt those patterns, to help them be more introspective and have more self-awareness. Self-awareness is huge. So it helps with that as well. So yeah, I mean, and I know this is going to sound strange to anyone who has not worked with psychedelics before, or who have maybe only done it kind of in a party atmosphere. But when you work with psychedelics, these plant medicine teachers, in a sacred, very respectful manner, you connect with a consciousness that is there. And that consciousness speaks to us not just on a chemical level or on a physical level, and even deeper than an emotional level. It can really touch us on this spiritual level. And this is when people talk about like really feeling what it's like to be one, to understand that we are all connected, to connect with source and to feel the love that is there for us. These kinds of transcendental experiences are amazingly healing for people, and they put life in perspective.
And so ironic that that is found to be so threatening.
Oh, very dangerous. That's very dangerous. You're taking the power away from the people who want to be in control. You know, you're just jumping them. You know, and you're going straight to the source.
Yeah.
Right? And also you lose a lot of fear. The more work that I've done with this, the more fearless I have become. And when you don't have fear, you can't be as controlled.
Very true.
Yeah. So I get why it's dangerous to them. And I love that we obviously are at a place in time that there are enough people that are ready, that this renaissance is really beginning to bubble up. And I really hope that this time they won't be able to stop it.
We're going to take just a quick break. This is Small Biz, Big Voices, hosted by Stephanie Rising. I'm a small business coach on a mission to get business owners off their hamster wheel and empower them as authentic and influential leaders. My coaching program centers around the 7 primal business needs. Today, I'm visiting with Alexis Lopez of a Transformative Touch Wellness Center. You know, when you were talking about how this is really gaining momentum, and I don't know if this is true or not. I'm basing this purely off of my own experience. But you know, I was young and starting to come of age during the Reagan era, and I think that there are a bunch of us who are now middle-aged. We're in our 40s. We've been around long enough to know that things that we were taught as absolutes have a lot more gray bandwidth to them than we were led to believe. And I think that middle age is just this perfect time of life to start questioning what we hold to be true, and you know, why do we hold it to be true, and test it a little bit. And so I find this topic really fascinating. I mean, I personally have never even smoked a cigarette, you know, let alone
that's good.
Yeah, let alone experimented with any drugs. But I find this subject really interesting, not because it is about drugs, but it's because in large part it is about something that we were taught to be true with a capital T. And it turns out it's a much more complex socioeconomic issue than we were led to believe. And if that's the case with this one subject, you know, imagine what other things that is also true of. I do acknowledge, and this is also speaking for myself, I do acknowledge that I think part of the anxiety with plant medicines is that we're used to, how do I put this? Like, we're used to navigating other things with a little more certainty, even if that certainty winds up having holes in it. And I do think that regardless of the profession, there are people out there who act with a great deal of integrity, and there are those who do not. And so kind of the anxiety-producing thing about plant medicine is it is a mind-expanding drug. It can take you to, let's just call them exotic, places in your mind. And because you're dealing with neuroplasticity and you're dealing with your brain, most people feel pretty protective of their brains. Mm-hmm. I know I
do. As they should.
As they should. And so I imagine all of that is kind of all the more challenge of a profession like yours, because you're already having to overcome this very deeply held stigma that plant medicine is only practiced by crackpots, mm-hmm. right? So if people want to open themselves to the possibility of using plant medicine as part of their self-care, what do they need to know? What should we be looking for so that we're not closed off to the possibility of what this medicine has to offer us, but we're also partaking in it in a very informed and respectful manner?
Great question. The first thing you need to know is that right now, all of these psychedelics are illegal in the U.S. So if you want to legally partake, then you need to go to Mexico, to South America, Central America, and some of the countries in Europe also have, they're legal. So if you're going to go to the underground, up to you, but obviously we don't sanctify that or anything. But
right.
Nonetheless, it's there, and lots of people are going to go there, and that's fine. That's one of the reasons that we go to Rocky Point, is because it's close to home, but it is legal in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So that's why we do our retreats outside the U.S. So a couple of things to think about. Think about who you want to do this with. Make sure, so like with ayahuasca, you want to make sure that you have an ayahuasquero or ayahuasquera. That means that is a shaman who has been taught specifically how to deal with ayahuasca. And it's someone who has done many, many years of practice and experience. So if someone's only done ayahuasca for a couple of years, they should not be leading ceremonies. It's just not safe. They don't have the experience, and they haven't done enough of their own work yet. Usually you need to do many years of your own work, then work as an assistant, then you become the master shaman to be able to lead the ceremonies. So, again, and there's things like psilocybin where people tend not to do it in a group. Maybe they're doing it at home alone. Do your research. Please do your research. Make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting. And really, we should always be doing our research. Just because we have we get scared about psychedelics. There's lots of over-the-counter drugs that are a lot scarier than psychedelics that we take without even thinking about it. So sure. I think that it's really important, whatever you're going to put in your body, do your homework and do your research on it. Make sure that if you're going to do it more on your own, I would have a sitter with you. I really would. Okay. I think it's important not to do these things on your own, just for safety. And if you're doing it in a community, make sure whoever it is that's leading it has the experience to be able to lead and to keep you safe. Make sure that you have medical screening too. There's different medications or different physical issues that don't go well with certain psychedelics. So I can't speak for all of them. I can speak for ayahuasca. If you have heart problems or really high blood pressure, it's not good with ayahuasca. If you are taking antidepressants, you can't take them when you're doing ayahuasca. It can be lethal. So if you're going to go and do something like ayahuasca, ibogaine is another one that you have to be very careful with. You need to make sure that whoever's putting it on, that they have done a medical screening. And if they're not asking medical questions, you shouldn't be doing anything with them, because you need to make sure that you're medically safe. Also, think about, the environment where you're going to be doing this, whatever it is, and make sure that you're safe. A lot of people talk about doing psilocybin outside. That's great. But again, be safe about that.
Right.
With ayahuasca, remember, you're going to be in a trance. Your consciousness will have changed. So something that may not seem very scary in this moment could be quite scary when you are in an altered state. And if you don't like the outside, if you're afraid of bugs or something, maybe you shouldn't be doing ceremony in an altered state out in the desert. that could cause some issues. And so a lot of times people talk about a bad trip. I don't think there really are bad trips. There are challenging trips, and there's a couple of reasons for them. Either it's because something has come up inside of us to be worked on. So some of the most challenging trips that I've taken, the most challenging journeys, have been the most worthwhile. They're the juiciest because I'm really getting into something that I need to look at and I need to let go of. Also, you could have a challenging journey because of the environment around you, and maybe you didn't pick a particularly good environment for you, or the person that's leading it didn't do a good job of keeping everyone safe. And so, you've got some people that are acting out, and that can definitely affect you and your journey. So anyways, a couple of things to think about, the group size, how big is the group? If you're doing it in a group, are there people there that can help you? Is the group so big and there's only like one person? That one person isn't going to be able to do what needs to be done. So again, just think about the fact that you're going to be in an altered state and what you need to be comfortable and to be safe.
That's a really good list. Actually, I'm going to borrow your notes and include those with today's show notes, so people have kind of a checklist that they can go over if they're thinking about doing something like this. So I want to remember that. We've covered a lot of ways in which plant medicine has been made to seem outside the norm or controversial, but let's look at something that seems to be popping up everywhere and really embraced, and that's CBD. Why do you think CBD oil in particular is so popular? Is this really having the effect that it's advertising, or is this just one of those things in the zeitgeist that feels maybe a little anti-authoritarian and therefore appealing? Or both?
Or both. Probably both a little bit. I mean, I think cannabis works with our endocannabinoid system. We actually have and I cannot think of the word right now, but it'll come to me. Our body's created to actually deal with cannabis. So the endocannabinoid system regulates things like our body temperature, pain levels, inflammatory response. And so the CBD actually works with that system in our body. So it really does work. Like anything, it's not going to work for everybody. It's something that, again, you can't overdose on it. If you take too much of it, you might have a bellyache, you might have some diarrhea, but you're not going to die from it. And the biggest thing that I've seen that it helps with, certainly seizures, that's what it was being used for with children. That's one of the ways that it really started to come back into public awareness, was that it was being used for children. And it can take kids that are having, hundreds of seizures a day down to none. Wow. So right there, you can see how it's affecting the body's system. But it also activates serotonin receptors, which helps with anxiety, addiction, appetite, sleep. So a lot of people take it to help with sleep. There's been some research that shows that it actually decreases the spread of cancer cells. But inflammation is the underlying foundation for most disease. So this is very anti-inflammatory. And if you bring down inflammation in the body, you're going to be preventing a lot of disease, and you're also going to be helping with a lot of pain. You're going to be helping with muscular pain, bone pain. They've even found that it's helping somewhat with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It can also help with when you have cancer and the side effects of chemo, so like the nausea, right? It can help people who are maybe, I remember with the AIDS epidemic, they were using cannabis to help them to eat because they would just waste away. They just didn't want to eat. And so by smoking cannabis, it was helping them to want to actually eat again. So it really, and there have been more studies done with cannabis than there have with a lot of the other psychedelics. But something to know about CBD, in case you didn't know, it's non-psychoactive, so you're not going to get high. It doesn't have THC in it. And it is legal. It's made from hemp. So I think that's the other reason, is you don't need a card. It's legal. It may be a little anti-authority. And I think it does work for a lot of people. It's really helping with a lot of those aches and pains, arthritis, and it's a lot more natural than the pills that you might be taking otherwise. So,
and particularly for people going through cancer treatment. I mean, like, as you're listing this off, I just remembered that a friend of mine, he passed away many years ago from cancer, but after he was diagnosed as terminal, he took medical marijuana for the pain, and particularly the nausea and the pain that went with his chemo treatments. And it helped him immensely, and it certainly made him much more comfortable in his last months.
Well, and that we have receptors, that was the word I was looking for, receptors in our brains for cannabis, for cannabinoids. That's
interesting.
Pretty interesting.
So we're already wired
We're already wired for it, right? Huh. So I don't know if it's there.
Seth Rogen will be so happy to hear this podcast.
Exactly. But if you are thinking of getting CBD, make sure that the plants are organic and U.S. grown. Make sure that the extraction is organic, and make sure that there's third-party testing. Because just because they say this is in the bottle and this is the amount in the bottle doesn't mean that that's what's in the bottle. The third-party testing really helps you to know that you're getting what you think you're getting.
Okay. I'm writing that down, so there's more I'll grab from you to put in the show notes so folks have that too. And I wanted to end our interview by inviting you to talk more about the concept of self-centered living, because I think that this dovetails in with the other areas of your practice. So, not unlike the types of healing that we've talked about today, the whole idea of being self-centered brings up very specific connotations for people. What do you mean by self-centeredness, and how does living that way positively impact ourselves as well as those around us?
Yes, self-centered is not to be confused with being selfish or self-absorbed. Being self-centered, I think of it as being 5 different philosophies or principles. The first one being awareness, responsibility, respect, imperfection, and unconditional living. So when we become more aware, first self-aware, and then more aware of how we affect others, how we're communicating with others, then we become more responsible, which means that we have better boundaries. We're able to, again, in a healthier manner, maneuver around in our relationships, our families, at work, because when we don't have very good boundaries, that sets up really unhealthy behavior. And it can lead to relationships falling apart that didn't need to fall apart had we been clearer about what's mine and what isn't mine. And we often talk about what's mine, but we don't talk about what isn't mine. And so we have a lot of overachievers out there, the perfectionists who just keep taking on, and they become kind of the doormat, and then they explode later on, or they just kind of implode at a certain point.
Oh, that just doesn't sound familiar at all.
Not at all. Yeah. And then, respect and learning to respect yourself and to respect other people. And that includes sometimes respecting that someone may not be who you want them to be. And that's okay. And letting it go. Because often we want someone to be that unicorn, and we just won't hear it when they're telling us with every fiber of their being, that's not who I am. And we hate it when someone doesn't see us, or doesn't treat us as we are, and is trying to make us into something else. Oh, I see the potential in you. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What about who I am right now? Can that be enough?
Right.
So we can do that to other people and not realize that we're doing that. And we do it to ourselves as well, which leads into imperfection, which is all about the shame. Shame is a really big issue in our society, and it's really at the core of a lot of our psychological, emotional wounds. And so beginning to understand that we are perfectly imperfect, and how do we live our lives that way? How do we finally acknowledge and give ourselves permission to be enough? And then that leads into unconditional living, which is really beginning to unhook our wellness, our alignment, our happiness from other people and from life circumstances. too often we are just knee-jerk. If we're late to something, that puts us in a bad mood. If, someone else isn't happy, well, we can't be happy. And so really beginning to realize, wait a second, no, I'm in control of my attitude, my thoughts, my happiness. No one else is responsible for those things. That's me. And when we begin to realize that other people can have their opinions about us, but that doesn't actually have to have anything to do with us, it's incredibly empowering and freeing for people. So the being self-centered in those 5 different philosophies is what I base my reset on as well. So I'm helping people to work through the wounds and the trauma in the past so that they can become more aware, more responsible, more respectful, love themselves even though they're imperfect, because we all are, and begin to live unconditionally in their lives and really embrace and enjoy this fantastic adventure that we're on.
I love it when you call it perfectly imperfect.
Yep.
It's just very validating. You can feel yourself just take a deep breath.
Yeah. And perfectionism, unfortunately, is one of the untalked about addictions that we have in this society. And it's very harmful to the people who have it and to the people who are around them. It's not fun to be like the spouse of a perfection addict or the kid of a perfection addict. So
for all of my type A's out there.
Yeah.
And I am your fellow type A. If you would like more information about Alexis's practice, her reset therapy model, or her ayahuasca retreats in Rocky Point, please visit her website at alexislopez.com. And Alexis is Alexcis. And I'm also going to include that link as well as some other information that we talked about in today's show notes. And now we are going to the Proust lightning round. The Proust questionnaire was a parlor game popularized by the French essayist and novelist Marcel Proust. He believed that by answering 35 specific questions, an individual reveals their true nature. We're going to go through as many questions as we can in just a few minutes. Are you ready?
This was the part I was most nervous about.
Well, so I'll start off with just the softball question. If you were to die and come back as a person or thing, what would it be?
Just a normal, everyday person. I really like life. So, yeah, just a normal, everyday person.
Just a Jane Doe.
Just a Jane Doe or John Doe or, whatever Doe.
Just a Doe.
Just a Doe.
What is your most treasured possession?
My most treasured possession? Me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very in keeping with everything that we just talked about today.
Yeah, I mean, I like
good.
lots of things I have, but I don't need any of them. Not really.
True. A good brain. A
Yes.
good brain has served you well.
Hopefully, keep the brain.
What do you regard as the lowest depth of misery?
Disconnection from source. And self, because source is self and self is source. So, yeah.
If you could do anything, what would be your occupation?
What I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's cool. What is your most marked characteristic?
Intensity, probably. I get a little intense for some people, and I get into some pretty weird stuff. So, yeah, my intensity about weird stuff.
So you can do really great gestures with just an eyebrow.
That's true, yeah.
You have,
see, but I can't see
like
that.
a magical eyebrow.
Yeah, but I can't see what my face is doing. A lot of times I do tell my face, what are you doing? Don't do anything I don't want you to do right now.
The eyes are getting big and the eyebrow is arched. What do you most value in your friends?
That they do their own work.
I like that. And the last one is, who are your favorite writers?
C.S. Lewis was one of my favorite writers. Not so much his Christian stuff, although that was good too, but I mean, his Christian stuff kind of went into everything, but like The Great Divorce, Until We Have Faces, he had a trilogy that was a science fiction trilogy that was just amazing. So I'll say him.
Okay, I wrote that down. The Great Divorce.
Oh.
I didn't read that one. Cool. I now have new tableside reading. All right, I would love to have you chime in at the end of our last segment. Dear Coach gives our listeners the chance to have their emailed questions addressed. And today's Dear Coach is about the 3 actions you can take to increase cash in your business. So I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, revenues are vanity, expenses are sanity, but cash is king. It's easy to fuel optimism with your sales numbers, and you can do your best to control costs. But what if your business leaks cash? How does that affect your daily operations? What's the impact on your own paycheck? These 3 steps will help you get some answers. So step 1, dig for details. Business owners typically review their P&L and balance sheet to give them an idea of how their business is performing and to prepare for filing taxes. But they often do not analyze their financials in any variance report format or broken down per revenue stream. Without this level of detail, trends and money leaks are easily hidden. I recommend meeting with an outside financial consultant or CPA every quarter to help you dig deep into your numbers. Ask them to provide you with a cash analysis and recommend actions that will produce cash for your business. Be sure to schedule the tasks you need to accomplish so you are more likely to turn ideas into actual results. Step 2, get out of the collection business. Tremendous time and energy can be spent on collecting receivables. And among the many problems this causes are instead of leading your company, you are chasing down what you earned months ago, and you have made spending decisions, including your own pay, while underfunded. So start with questions like, should I shorten my net payment terms? Should I ask for down payments or progress payments for large projects? Do I have clients who chronically pay late, never refer business, but take tremendous resources from me? Determine how to close the gap between when you provide versus when you receive. And the third step is beware shiny objects. Got to have technology, tools, office space, vehicles, inventory, conferences, and tropical locales. While expenses are often for legitimate reasons, just beware those shiny objects that make it easy to believe you have to have them. It's critical you understand how such purchases impact your cash and the time it takes to recoup your investment. Before making a capital investment in your business, inventory all of your assets, physical, fiscal, and people. Determine whether you effectively utilize what you already have, what you'd have to do to make that happen, and how you would like to make the most of anything new. You can even approach employee evaluations this way. You may just find that you're underutilizing a talented person. Alexis, we have a couple of minutes left. What advice or stories can you add to cash? And especially, one thing that comes to mind, given what you do for a living and other people I've coached who are in like the healing arts, there's something very, I don't know, it almost feels gross to charge or to ask for money, because what you're doing is trying to be of service in this very personal and healing way. But if you don't stay in business, you can't help more people. So how have you squared that for yourself, that you are a healer, but you are also very much a businesswoman?
Yeah, that is a problem often in the healing world, is that there is this idea, and I think it's a very old one, that people who are true, air quotes, true healers should give it away for free. And I think that probably when we lived in communities, when we lived in villages, that worked because it was communal and everyone was taken care of. You could be the healer and you were going to have food on the table and you were going to have a place to live and you knew that everything was going to be taken care of. But that's not how our society works. And it's very unfair to ask people who are true, authentic, very talented healers to not be able to pay their mortgages because then you'd be kind of shaming them into it. Well, if you charge something, then you can't be real and you must be scamming people. And no, of course not. You don't take advantage of people, but it should be okay. And we need to, as healers, as practitioners, give ourselves permission to charge fair market value for the expertise, the schooling, the years of experience that we've had to accumulate to be able to give relief to other people, whether that's a massage or whether that's psychotherapy or whether that's, retreats to do meditation. So yeah, it is an issue though, because there is that feeling that it's gross, to do that, and we shouldn't be asking for money. So, and the next time that we live in a village, I'm cool with giving it for free. But right now, I got to pay bills, and I can't be there for people and give my very best if I can't pay my bills. And
if you're always preoccupied about how do you make ends meet, I think part of being of service to another, regardless of your occupation, is it's a gift to be fully present.
Yes.
And if you're worried about paying the bills, what's going to happen with the mortgage? How are you going to keep the lights on? How are you going to feed your kids? That preoccupation really detracts from what you're there to give. So I agree 100%. Taking the time to honor what value you bring and charging for that value is a big part of being a healer who also happens to be in business. So I'm glad
to live in this reality.
And to live in this reality, yes. That brings us to the end of today's episode. If you have a question or problem you'd like for us to talk about during our Dear Coach segment, please email me at stephanie@therisingeffect.com. I also invite you to follow the show on our Small Biz Big Voices Facebook page, which includes show notes and announcements for upcoming programs. Next month, I'll be visiting with Elizabeth Slater, the CEO of Youth on Their Own. My thanks again to my guest, Alexis Lopez of I'm all tongue-tied. I got so much to think about now. Can't even say the name of your business. Alexis Lopez of a Transformative Touch Wellness Center. My producer, Mark Bishop, and to you for joining us on Small Biz Big Voices.